We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Thursday, and welcome to it, guys, on rumble.com/amradpod. See you in the chat there. And while you're there, make sure that you give us a thumbs up and follow the channel. Subscribe if your heart compels you to do that. You can listen to us on iTunes and Spotify and iHeart. Subscribe there. You get the shows when we update you on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10:30 Eastern Time. Also on YouTube and on @XAmerica News, trying to expand the overall empire here on the AmRad Pod. So for Thursday, we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to coin, trademark a new term. It's called the Captain Obvious Doctrine. And the premise is things that are so clear that you could be woken out of a deep sleep in the middle of the night, very much like I was woken out of a deep sleep in the middle of the night when my Rumble app, which was not pulled up at the time, went off and woke me and my wife up. So I have a witness to this because likely the FBI was remotely accessing my computer, and we'll get into that in a second. You would be woken up and come to the inevitable conclusion about something that was so obvious and so clear, you could not debate it one way or another unless you are a double-digit IQ or a communist. So we'll get some examples today and some big ones that I'm really fired up about, and I know Garrett will be fired up about as well. We're talking about the FBI election interference that was revealed recently and marry that to the FBI targeting First Amendment protected activity yet again, and the reasons behind it, I'm going to speculate, are not good. Judges are allowing free speech police to continue to exist at a federal level. You have riots in Los Angeles that are costing money. Again, Captain Obvious. Bribery schemes over at the USAID have been exposed even more. The climate pagans are targeting the most vulnerable amongst us, that is, the women. And people don't like paying more money for energy. Again, Captain Obvious. So got to get to all that. We got a lot here in store for you today, and grateful to have you along with us, as is my co-host and cohort, compadre at GOB Actual. And Garrett, before we start, I think we got to break some news. Actually, more in line of memorializing things that happened. I think this is like setting the defense for ourselves when inevitably the tactical team comes in and kicks down your door and my door and says they had sensitive matters on their computer devices that we totally 100% didn't plant on them in the middle of the night. And on Tuesday, I talked about getting woken up in the middle of the night. My phone was on Do Not Disturb, silent, on a charger, and then the AmRad podcast video that I have set up for the stream, the placeholder video on loop, blasts out, and I have to shut it down. So at that point,
Steve,
I guess
it's very weird, isn't it, when your phone or your computer starts doing weird things like that? And lo and behold, we have a background as police officers and as FBI agents. And I remember a time when I did a Title III, and at the same time, another agent in my office had a Title III. For those of you who don't know, that's when the government taps into your phone or your computer or both, and they are live monitoring what you're doing. And the government can do that with a FISA as well. And I remember my cohort on the criminal squad who was doing his at the same time. Well, he was a little bit ahead of me. He was like on his second or third re-up, and I was like going to him like, "Hey man, how do I do this? What do I write? Nobody on my squad knows what to do. I've been digging through Sentinel to try to figure it out." And he's like showing me stuff, and there were messages, text messages between these people who were being investigated that were saying things like, "Man, something's going on with my phone? What's going on
I
with
haven't paid my
this?"
bill, but it's still active.
Yeah, because once you know it, you have to use Sprint or AT&T or Verizon or whoever to actually tap into it. So they get the court order, and then they tap into the phone on the government's command. And so, of course, there might be some weird things that go along with that. And I remember thinking, like, man, eventually these people are going to know that the government tapped into their phone. Or if you were intercepted on it, you also get a notice. And I was thinking about that when you told me the day after that your Rumble went off, and then what we're about to get into happened.
Yeah.
But that same night, I was having some weird dreams, man. Really weird. And I don't usually remember my dreams. And I had two that I woke up and I was like, that's weird. What happened there? And it, as you were doing the intro, it made me think of this verse. I know we aren't at the end yet, and this is off topic for what we'll get there, but in Job 33, verse 14 starting, it says, for God speaks in one way and in two, though man does not perceive it, in a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on men while they slumber on their beds, then he opens the ears of men and terrifies them with warnings, that he may turn aside, that he may turn man aside from his deed and conceal pride from a man. He keeps back his soul from the pit, his life from perishing by the sword. And I remember the first time I did like a deep dive into Job, it was in the early era of being a suspendable. And it was a difficult time, as everybody knows. But this deep study we did through the book of Job, when I came across that part, it really stuck out to me as someone who doesn't typically remember my dreams. But ever since then, it's always been on my mind when I have a vivid dream, which is rare. And so it's interesting of what has happened in the last couple days and what you're about to share.
So let's share it because this is an experience that I had yesterday, and you, when I pointed it out, went and experimented and had the exact same experiment. Because for those who don't know, my social media is basically dedicated to reading DOJ press releases that the FBI puts out. And we've done multiple episodes of the American Radicals podcast on it. And I've gotten pretty proficient at seeing the post and being like, that doesn't smell right. I'm going to read the press release. And more often than not, I'm right. And they're taking credit for something they didn't do. So I tried to do that yesterday, and I got the following message every single time, and still get the same message every time I try to access any link to the Department of Justice's website, including the www.justice.gov. It says access denied. I tried it from my MacBook. I tried it from my laptop. I tried it from my phone. Always denied. And yet my wife tried it on her phone and was able to get access. And you tried it using a VPN and were able to get access, which I can only surmise as a somewhat quasi trained investigator with over a decade and a half of experience that there is some sort of a block on my IP address and yours as well. What is the benign and innocent reason for that, Garrett?
There would be none, Steve, none that I can fathom, none that I can think of. We know because it was, let's see, it's June 19th, roughly a year ago. I got a declination notice from the United States Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia saying, at this time, we are no longer seeking criminal charges against your client. So my lawyers called me at 11 p.m. one night and said, can you possibly think of anything you did that was criminal? And I was like, no, I've told you guys literally everything. You know as much or more than the closest people in my life of what has transpired in the last couple years. And they're like, well, we just got this notice. And they called me. It was a couple days or like a week roughly before we actually got the declination. And this high ranking person in civil rights, what was her name? I forget off the top of my head because we do need to name these people, but of course I'm not prepared with it. I thought I'd remember. I don't.
Not Kristen Clark, the one who lied to Congress about chopping her husband up with a knife.
No, no, not her. A different heathen, but I remember thinking like, what the heck? And because too, as we've talked about before, for a lot of this path, we thought, especially as former SWAT FBI agents, like, oh, a SWAT team or the FBI's HRT is going to come kick in our door at 6 a.m. because when you live in a tyranny, that's what the secret police do. And maybe some people would say, well, that's not a reasonable fear. Well, come and walk a mile in my shoes, much less 3 years, and maybe you'll change your mind on that. But that day never came. There were many days where I got up before 6 a.m. to leave the house to go do my own counter surveillance to see if anything was in the neighborhood. And I know that's similar for a lot of us who have done that type of thing. But then, of course, after the election, it was like, all right, maybe things will change. And in a way, things have only gotten worse. And
Mhm.
we're yet to learn what this denied access is all about. I won't hold my breath that we ever will learn. But to me, I don't know how I conclude anything other than something nefarious being afoot.
Mhm. So that's an appropriate way to lead into the secret police we're going to talk about. I think we're going to spend a good chunk of today's show on these two stories that I think need to be addressed and married together in light of this Captain Obvious doctrine. So let's begin with what was exposed earlier in the week. Just the News broke it, and it was about an intel memo that went out about the Chinese government attempting to impact the 2020 presidential election. Here's the article at Just the News. It says FBI asks spy agencies to destroy intel on alleged China plot to aid Joe Biden in the 2020 election. So a confidential human source, which is a snitch and informant, told FBI counterintelligence in the summer of 2020, in the lead up to that presidential election, that China's government was shipping fake driver's licenses to America to manufacture tens of thousands of fraudulent mail-in votes for Joe Biden. U.S. Customs, Border, and Protection captured 19,888 fake driver's license, mostly from Hong Kong and China, in July. Again, that seems like it's the summer of 2020. And they are on their way to battleground states in the Midwest. The intelligence report was not deemed corroborated, making clear it was raw intelligence, and that the informant was relatively new, had been corroborated for less than a year. So they're saying that we are not 100% hard on this, like that this is absolutely true, but the facts are starting to line up with what this confidential source revealed. It also noted that this information was indirect through a sub-source. Now, this report flagged one aspect of the informant's allegation, that the information for the fake driver's licenses was gleaned from TikTok accounts of Americans. So we're making the argument that this source is not reliable and that the information is open source, and in essence, it can be dismissed. But when you capture 20,000 driver's licenses, that corresponds quite nicely with what the original reporting was. The report was sent to U.S. intelligence agencies in August of 2020, so they already had the licenses in hand, as an uncorroborated advisory, and then suddenly recalled. They pulled it back, obliterated it from the system, and said they had to re-interview the source.
No way, dude.
They had to re-interview the source to make sure that the source said what they wanted the source to say, which was, I got everything from TikTok. I made this all up entirely, right? Now, I'm fired up about this
Rightfully
because,
so.
you know, we talk a lot, and it's been a lot of discussion about the FBI's impact. And in the past, I've said, look, here's what we know that they did. We know about James Comey running this off the books honeypot scheme to infiltrate the Donald Trump campaign in 2016. We know about the Russia, where they took opposition research from Hillary Clinton and laundered it into intel reporting and leaked it to the media so that they could get fake FISAs. We know that they had Hunter Biden's laptop in evidence, and then they went to social media and suppressed it. All those efforts were to impact elections. Impact. Like, we're not going to let derogatory information come out about Joe Biden. We'll hide the Hunter Biden laptop. That might hurt his image. People might not go to the polls and vote for him then. Or we're going to try to dig up dirt on Donald Trump, or even criminally charge him. But that will discourage people from voting him. This is actively being involved in an effort to stuff ballots into ballot boxes to raise the numbers in battleground states that were very close. This is the worst election crime that has been of all of them that we've talked about. And if you knew nothing else, if I memory wiped you with the Men in Black laser about everything else that I just talked about, Hunter Biden, Russia, James Comey, the boogeyman James Comey at this point, because we don't talk about Christopher Wray. If you knew none of that, and I said the FBI had evidence that China tried to stuff the ballots for a presidential candidate who we know that the Biden family is very closely tied to the government of China, you would say that agency needs to be obliterated into a million pieces and scattered to the wind. This is the biggest story that no one is talking about other than John Solomon at Just the News. Ergo, no one is talking about it.
Right. This, to me, when I think of this story and I think of what we've seen from the head shed at the FBI in the last handful of months, especially all this talk about the good men and women of the FBI. And if you just empower them to go do their job. They're going to do it, and they're going to be not the Captain Obvious of America, but just Captain America. And there are thin line between terrorism and freedom and America. Are they though? Because this is coming out 5 years later. These people most likely are still there. Very few have actually been fired or forced to resign or whatever mechanisms were used. And so you talk about the good men and women. Are they though? And when I think about my former colleagues, I think yeah, there were some who were good from a humanistic perspective, from a human standpoint. But they all had that line. And oh, I'm not going to cross that line because well, I've got a mortgage to pay and I've got mouths to feed. So, are they good enough? Maybe for most things they're good enough. But then you have those who are truly evil, like the unnamed FBI employees with this topic alone, who got this information. And one of the key factors with a CHS, a confidential human source, like they had here, who said, "Hey, here's this information." One of the things you do with a source, and it's an ongoing process, is you try to corroborate their information that they give you, and you try to determine how reliable they are. Is information they gave you in the past, has it panned out? Was it true? Have they helped get you to some type of charging stage in a case or prosecutorial stage? Has their information been good? Have you caught them in a lie in the past? Have you had to confront them on that? And so you're constantly weighing all these things as you go throughout your relationship with the source. But in this case, they got the information and then they, as Steve said, obliterated it from the FBI systems because they didn't want it to be true.
The only time that I've heard about obliterating something, which we know they didn't do, was when Christopher Wray was aghast when he learned that an intelligence product was authored not based on any source reporting, but by going to the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Atlantic and Brookings Institute to find out that people who attended the Latin Mass could be anti-government extremists. That intel product was circulated to over 1,000 FBI employees and only pulled back allegedly from Christopher Wray when he learned about it and really the public learned about it because the Suspendables exposed it. That's the
And
only
this
other time I've heard of something being withdrawn. But the FBI felt confident, and Stanley Meter was the final signee and was proud of the perspective that was brought forward on that
That's
to
right.
circulate that.
Which fact check here, we have the receipts because Stanley Meter was interviewed under oath, and unlike Jennifer Moore, he didn't lie. He did say, yes, I was grateful for the perspective that they brought. This is a guy who was an SAC. There was enough pushback where I heard from people inside the FBI that he's gone. He's gone now. So I don't know if that's true, but I would imagine that the people who told me this were being honest about that, which is a good thing. But why did it take so long? Because there were press conferences where Stanley Meter was standing right behind the Attorney General or right behind the director of the FBI. And let's not forget that the Suspendable, who first discovered that information and brought it forward, they were retaliated against when there's no doubt in my mind that every single person in the country had the right to know that that's what the FBI was doing. But they say, well, that's not a protected disclosure because it was leaked to the media. Okay, well, if even if that is what the law says, maybe there needs to be caveats for things like this because that person was retaliated against, forced out like everybody else, and then that information was like the thermal exhaust port as we've called it before because it went far and wide because people were like, no way was the FBI doing this, but they were. And then more recently we found out it was far more widespread than initially known, which I would say is indicative of both Merrick Garland and Christopher Wray perjuring themselves, although I will consider that they weren't fully briefed up on the information because the people under them didn't want them to know that information. And you would have to be an absolute fool to think that that isn't currently happening in the FBI. You think the people under Cash Patel and Dan Bongino want them to know every dirty little secret? No, because those people have risen through the ranks for 20 years And rule number 1 is you don't embarrass the FBI. So do you think they're really telling them everything they need to know? Absolutely not.
So the Captain Obvious doctrine, we're backwards looking, right? The radical Catholic memo, this 2020 election interference from China, which was under the directorship of Christopher Wray, who we can't talk about. We only talk about James Comey now. That's all backwards looking. So the Captain Obvious doctrine would demand that we would do away with this agency, or if we're going to give it the old college try, we're going to get our number one draft choice in position 1 and position 2. We are not going to settle for second best on anything. So we are now based, America. We are so back. We got Kash Patel at the helm. We got Dan Bongino in the number 2 slot, which is why, in light of this Captain Obvious doctrine foundation that I've set, I want to marry this revelation to another one, and that is this story about the Coast Guard sharpshooter. And stick with me on this one, guys, because we're going to have to work our way through it on multiple grounds. This is reporting from Fox News. Former Coast Guard officer arrested after allegedly threatening to assassinate Trump. This is per the FBI. The FBI went out and made this arrest of this guy. Now, what they also did was publish the affidavit, which is 19 pages, and I read through it all. Our bad guy's name is Peter Andrew Stinson, and he's being charged in the Eastern District of Virginia, a very soft district, a very sympathetic to the government's position district. And I want to go through a lot of what is brought out here in this charging document, because in the charging document, you don't have to go beyond a reasonable doubt. That's for trial. It's probable cause, which isn't even 50%, right? The bar for that is relatively low when you think about things. Like when you're in the area of taking someone's freedom away as a percentage, I mean, it seems relatively low to put handcuffs on somebody and confine their movement. But, if I had to put a number on it, would you say like 35 to 40% seems like probable cause?
I always tried to operate under the premise of, is it 50%, 0.1?
Sure.
So maybe that standard was
Preponderance
higher.
of evidence. Okay, so I want to go through what they lay out here in this 19 pages, which is essentially they culled through Mr. Stinson's social media accounts. He seems to be very active on social media. He is a dyed-in-the-wool communist leftist, hates Donald Trump, and they pulled out everything that he ever said that was they deemed to be offensive or deemed to be supporting this threats to the president of the United States. Online harassment, maybe. I don't know. I'll let you be the judge. You're the First Amendment absolutist. I'll let the audience be the judge. And we're going to do some hard lifting here, guys, because we're going to work through a lot of what he said per the affiant on this document, who is named Michael Blake, who is a task force officer with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. His full-time job is he works for the Parks Department in Washington, D.C. So I don't know why, but he's a task force officer.
How does that guy get a task force position?
U.S. Park Police Detective Sergeant is now working terrorism with the FBI. But
what are we, the Brits now? Detective Sergeant?
The entire evidence that is presented here is solely his online posts. So we'll judge them on those. All right. And I'll work my way through them and let me see if any of these are violative of federal law, Garrett. All right. February 2020, he posted a photo on Twitter that appeared to be a screenshot of a Snapchat post. The photo was an animated figure with the likeness of himself, Stinson, and the text across it said, "I have been voting for 40 years. Never have I felt compelled to put a political bumper sticker on my car until now. Hashtag vote blue, no matter who, 2020.
Why is that included? What does that show?
Excellent point. He cited Colonel Vindman in there. Again, waiting on the illegal activity, but we're just setting the groundwork for how evil and diabolical Mr. Stinson, internet troll, leftist, communist actually is. A few months later, they had to go through all of that. But it was April that he posted, "This morning, I feel like I would hit him in the head with an oar. He wants us dead. I can say the same thing about him. I want you dead is not a threat."
No. We've talked about this before. I forget the title of the case right off the top of my head, but it was the 18-year-old kid at a Vietnam protest rally who said, if they give me an M16, the first person I want to get in my sights is LBJ. And the Supreme Court said that's protected speech. That's political hyperbole. It's protected. That's far worse than I feel like I would want to hit him with an oar. And you're putting it on Twitter because he's not in the proximity to be able to do that. Did they determine that he even has an oar to bat this guy in the head with?
They're gonna go kick in his door to see on the
I mean,
search if they can find an oar. All right.
We found one. We found an oar.
He posts this morning. I'm sorry. So somebody ought to do more than sue the orange MFer's ass.
Okay.
It involves a rifle and a scope, but I can't talk about it here. I'd be willing to pitch in $100 for a contract. Who wants to join me? We could solve the solvable part of this problem in a crack. Then we can focus on the coronavirus.
Okay. Again, is it salacious?
I can't say without laughing.
Yeah, sure. It's salacious. But again, I want to get LBJ in my sights protected.
Well, but he said this in April of 2020. So the true threat nature of this in 2025 is dissipated to negative integers.
Right. Did you determine that he sent somebody $100? Was he on the Silk Road trying to hire a hitman? I mean, come on. This is, oh, dude. And I'm sure you have more, and I'm already at the end of my
I've got
wits.
plenty here. I told you we're going to do some slogging through here. What an effing moron! Would someone just pull the proverbial trigger? Please.
Hey, proverbial.
I would do it. I would take the fall to save America. Too bad I don't have the operational skills to pull it off. Okay, I'm willing to serve in a support capacity for someone else with the skills to take care of things.
Dude, again, I don't know how this
isn't even illegal in 2020, let alone 2025.
No, this does not pass any First Amendment muster to get yourself to unprotected speech. I know a suspendable who once used the word proverbial. And they were asked about that. Do you remember that?
I said rhetorical.
Dang it.
Yeah, I said this is a rhetorical call to arms for all my civic servants who swore an oath and I was told that using the phrase rhetorical call to arms was an incitement of violence by the FBI Security Division.
Yeah, right. Which tells you again all you need to know. The people who are supposed to uphold your constitutional rights don't even know what those are.
August 2020. Only racists and fascists will cast their vote for the orange MFer.
Okay.
I would pull the trigger.
Okay. 2020 again.
October, coming up on the election. I mean, China's already sent the driver's licenses over. I'd pull the trigger, but I'm not a good enough shot. I'll drive. I'm willing to drive. He needs to be punched to a different reality.
Everybody needs a good wheel, man.
So in December, after the election, he says, let's end this national nightmare now. I'll drive. January 3rd, 2021. So this is before January 6th. Trump is still president. Stints posts, let's just shoot the orange and put him out of his misery. This is after he lost the election. And I'm sure Stinson was very happy with that, saying like, oh, he's crying about losing the election. And this is a reference to, let's just put him out of his misery, sour grape sort of thing. Again, this is over 4 years ago, nothing. Then he moved over to Blue Sky because his feelings got hurt when Twitter became X, and he started posting there. And now we've jumped forward in the affidavit from January of 2021 to March of 2024. They skipped over 3 years to then go and get more incriminating evidence of his intention to assassinate the president. He posts, I'd take the shot, but I'm a lousy shot and it would be a waste.
Okay, it's the same tweets
over and over again, which is why it's ridiculous. And they say, well, he's a sharpshooter. He had the capacity to do it. He's not referencing that. If he was on there saying, hey, by the way, I'm a great shot, trained, and could kill a man from any distance with any firing platform, and I'd take the shot, even then it's dubious, but it's a little bit more compelling. He's flat out saying, I don't have the skill set, so that implies that I'm not going to do it. Heated rhetoric. In July 2024, last year, in the heat of another election. But as I've said before, I'm not a good enough shot, but I can plan the hell out of a mission heading to the closet now to see if I can find a complete uniform. After the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt, here's some of his comments. What a-hole thought he was good enough to complete the mission and then so really F it up? Shit takes skills, practice, etc. Most of us are not capable. As noted before, I'm not a good enough shot. Very few people are. Somebody needs to learn this lesson.
I'm
3
starting to
inches.
think I'm starting to think that this guy has looked into First Amendment case law before
Oh,
because he
yeah.
likes to put these caveats in there.
3 inches to the right, and the shot would have gone through the eyeball. Practice, practice, practice.
Hey,
Next
that's
time, don't jerk the trigger.
hey, probably not wrong.
All right.
But James Crooks would still be a marksman because hey, there
He,
Donald Trump got hit a little bit.
yeah, he got a headshot off.
But like that, like Mr. Stinson notes, you need someone with more skill than just a regular old marksman.
All right. Now we go post election into January of this year, January 28th, 2025, which means that they culled through 5 years of this guy's social media. Somebody needs to do it. Somebody with the skills to do it right. Somebody with the experience. Somebody with the right tools. Somebody needs to get it done. Does it say, I am going to get it done?
Never.
Poison. That might be the only solution at this point. Take out 1 and 2. Got to get close to disperse. Need a plan. Anyone done this sort of work before?
Part of me thinks he's trying to get an FBI agent to show up at his door.
That's probably, yeah. I mean, look, that's an interesting hypothesis because then he could go on his Blue Sky account and say, look
Right.
at the jackbooted thugs who are infringing on my First Amendment speech. And instead, the jackbooted thugs are going to put him in prison. So he's actually got a more compelling case now. February, we all know what needs to be done. I don't have the skills. The planning continues, options discarded, more options created, looking for an opportunity, a hole in the wall. Only need one. Pick the time, pick the place, planning offense, not defense, turning over variations to face, and the best plan, the one with the greatest chance of success, get it done. No reference to anything in there whatsoever. I mean, he could be talking about, plans to put his kids' treehouse together over the weekend. Take the shot. We'll deal with the fallout. Politically, the only solution is impeachment. Realistically, the only solution is violence. Okay? Heated rhetoric. And this is my favorite in March. He needs to be Luigi'd. And then he posted 8647.
Oh, well, of course. Of course he did. If Jim Comey can do it, I can do it.
So, I mean, and this is 19 pages. And I've read a healthy portion of them. They're basically maybe 2 pages worth of them. I read through every single one of them, Garrett. And every single one, I mean, I was repeating it over and over again. I don't have the skills. I don't have the skills. I don't have the skills. That is a mantra throughout this entire charging document. And he is now under arrest.
Show me the man.
And where's the Captain Obvious doctrine? We're laughing about this because we're definitely a little bit more schooled up on the First Amendment. I think other people get emotional because that's my quarterback, that's my president. You're going to jail. The last element of this that I would like to bring in, we're saying the Captain Obvious doctrine. If we knew what would happen before with the Chinese government trying to impact an election, you would say get rid of this agency. But we're getting at the old college try now. Then they're sending the jackbooted thugs after people that are engaging in First Amendment protected activity, very much like the old boss, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And what's the politics of it? Well, he doesn't like Donald Trump. And the last element, which I found on X, and I will throw up here. This comes from the Oversight Project, an arm of Heritage. Oversight Project investigation leads to arrest. So an independent investigation by the Heritage Foundation. On June 10th, Oversight Project alerted the feds about a self-proclaimed Antifa May Day organizer, Peter Stinson, threatening President Trump. The FBI's counterterrorism task force just arrested him for these threats. Garrett, did the FBI go and arrest this guy as a favor to the Heritage Foundation so that they could put out a post on X? Is that what we've descended to here? Captain Obvious doctrine says we got to put Old Yeller down entirely. And I say that rhetorically for those who are watching and want to plant CSAM on my computer. Old Yeller being the FBI as an institution, as an organization, shattered to a million pieces and scattered to the wind. It is the secret police. It is the Cheka. It is the end of the country if it is allowed to continue, and I don't care who's at the helm.
No, it clearly doesn't matter who's at the helm. For the last 4 years, we decried Joe Biden and Christopher Wray's FBI going after protected speech, going after Catholics for their protected speech, going after political dissidents for their protected speech, charging them like Douglas Mackey, for instance, for protected speech.
This is sort of in line with Douglas Mackey's timeline too, because he had posted things during the 2016 election, and then 2021 comes around and they arrest him for it.
Mhm.
This is the exact same thing.
Right. This guy didn't get arrested during Joe Biden's tenure. Was this case open, or did they do all of this digging through his social media in retrospect
They kept
after?
the CT case open for 5 years.
Yeah, which they would do. And now, oh, hey, we got a new boss. Another critical element that this shows you is that the vast majority of people in the FBI, even if they're just a Joint Terrorism Task Force officer from the freaking Parks Department, they will just do what they're told. They don't care who the target is. It's good enough for government work. I got to have a case. The political winds have shifted. Oh, here's a case that will work. Here's a case that will take, across the finish line, because we've already seen it. As much as I disdain Jim Comey tweeting a picture of seashells that most likely he put to say 8647, which he's stumped about how, oh, we just found it. Yeah, sure you did. As much as you may not like it, which we've talked about plenty of times before, that's what the First Amendment exists for. It doesn't exist for speech that you like. It exists for all speech within the confines of the system we've set up. We've talked about unprotected speech before too. There are a handful of categories that are unprotected, and the bar is very high. And it doesn't matter who's in charge. You've seen Pam Bondi, you've seen Merrick Garland, you've seen Chris Wray, you've seen Kash Patel, all go on to Fox News or CNN or wherever and discuss speech they don't like, and but to try and criminalize it. That shouldn't happen from any Democrat or Republican or cabinet member from either side. It needs to go. Which, that talking point for 4 years hit home with a lot of people. Some people are starting to catch on that the old boss is the same as the new boss. Many still aren't, because, they're cheerleaders for their side. That is not how a republic is supposed to function. That is not how freedom works.
All right. I think we've drilled down on these two stories enough, and we got a lot to get to here as we're talking about the Captain Obvious doctrine. I want to, have a preponderance of evidence so that my trademark term will maybe stick. Plus, I'm really proud of that thumbnail that we have today with the Captain America shield.
It's a cool thumbnail. When you
but before we do, let's thank the show's sponsor for the day, and that's the M-Clip Company. m-clip.com is where you go, m-clip.com. And when you go there, you can use the promo code SUSPENDABLE to get 10% off all the money clips that are there. Lifetime guarantee. Even if you mess it up, they will fix it. They're really cool. It's not just limited to the Suspendables logo and emblem. If you want that, that's great. But you can get all the assortment they have there, your initials on them, baseball teams. And we are in the summertime here. So I know baseball for some people is their favorite sport, and you want to go out there and actually have some money to put into your money clip, because these won't break the bank. And you also get 10% off with the discount. Go to m-clip.com, and the promo code is suspendable. So let's pivot away to another one. It is weaponized government. It is a Captain Obvious, and it's something that we've talked about in the past. So I found this piece over at Federalist. A California judge stops the Trump administration from firing internet speech police. Now, through the miraculous powers of an activist judge, this is interesting writing here, and I like it. San Francisco's senior district judge, it's a district judge, of course. Her name is Susan Ilston. She ordered that the Trump administration must not dismantle the Counter Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference Hub. That is government speak. Its acronym is RFIMI, RFIMI. It was formerly called the Global Engagement Center, which got me thinking, I know I've heard that term before. And I had, actually, on a Saturday grab bag, episode 206. I looked it up for you, Rose, but you can throw it in the comments anyway. About us, the Global Engagement Center, which was ended December 23rd of last year in the very final days of the Joe Biden administration. The Global Engagement Center was what Marco Rubio called out and said that in a cabinet meeting, the Biden administration State Department kept dossiers on Americans accused of serving as vectors of disinformation and included a file on a member of the Trump administration. The Global Engagement Center engaged with media outlets and platforms to censor speech it disagreed with. The center was accused of censoring conservatives online. And now, according to this judge in California, the Trump administration is not allowed to get rid of it. The Captain Obvious Doctrine says a couple things. One, the government should never be the arbiter of right think or wrong think because the government is Skynet and will inevitably come after you, the person who is capable of unplugging it, and will use all the levers of power and funding and tools and personnel to do that. And secondly, when some podunk district judge says that no, you have to continue through $50 million to fund the internet censure police force at the State Department, you say, you win what army, Judge? I could wake you out of a dead sleep tonight, right, Garrett? And you would come to that conclusion?
Of course. Of course. Dump a bucket of water on my face. What's the question? Oh, yeah, you're right. What you and what army, Judge? And again, man, a judge is supposed to be impartial. They're supposed to rule based on the law, based on case law. Here we go with government censorship again. And dude, I don't know, man. I know we often say we are like ACLU attorneys from the 1990s, but where are the rational people in government who step forward, whether it's a judge, whether it's a cabinet member, whatever it is, whether it's the president or vice president? Why are you not standing on the pillar that has helped make this country so wonderful and strong and powerful over the last 200 plus years? That is, we can have meaningful debate. We can talk to each other. We can argue with each other. We can yell and scream at each other all we want. But we don't, no one has the right to censor speech that is protected. And in this case, it's, well, you got a judge. Okay, they argued that they're censoring conservatives. We got a guy who was arrested for his tweets on Blue Sky. And I just keep thinking, First Amendment, apparently the First Amendment doesn't matter.
And this judge is actually requiring the Trump administration to come back to her if they want to make any personnel decisions.
Oh, yes, because you're the arbiter of
She's human resources now, Judge Jezebel. All right. Captain Obvious Doctrine. Did you know that riots might cost your city money?
I mean, that seems pretty obvious.
Protests against ICE raids and the No King's Day event have cost the city of Los Angeles millions of dollars. The city recently balanced its budget after facing a roughly $1 billion deficit.
And Eyewitness News investigative reporter Kevin Osabek is here with the numbers as 7 on your side investigates the cost. Kevin?
Well, David and Giovanna, with thousands of officers working overtime and some agitators turning destructive, we knew there was going to be a huge cost to you, the taxpayer. And now we have the numbers. These huge protests have cost the city a whopping $19.7 million. That's according to the city's administrative officer. Now, much of that $19.7 million is coming from the LAPD at nearly $17 million. We're going to break down this number a little bit further in just a few seconds. But we can also see the response from the LAFD has cost $1.2 million. There's been nearly $600,000 in damage to city buildings. The street cleaning for city streets has cost over $500,000. And there's been at least $85,000 in graffiti cleanup. But we are told that number is going to climb.
All right, Garrett. That doesn't even include the private property. The city itself is out $20 million. If I dumped a bucket of water on you tonight and I said, hey, Garrett, do riots cost the taxpayers money?
Yes. Let me go back to sleep. I like how at the bottom it said protests. Protests cost the taxpayer or whatever it said. Protests do. How about criminal riot? How about that? Because that's what this resulted in. And think if I know LA's big, and it certainly was one of the biggest No Kings protests. I use my finger quotes there. No Kings riots. What's the total for all the cities that had these? It's got to be billions, right? If it's, or maybe not billions, but a lot, hundreds of millions across the country. But hey, that was mostly peaceful, other than, you know, those few police cars that were first spray painted with ACAB, and then the windshield was smashed, and then it was torched and set aflame. But hey, in this instance, if you're a politician on the left side of the aisle, they have a right. They have a right to protest. Well, they don't have a right to engage in criminal activity. So,
Captain Obvious Doctrine. Is USAID a complete boondoggle op that's been running for years on end, and our politicians refuse to defund it because they're all either compromised or got their belly up to the faucet here, and they're taking a drink themselves? I wanted to go over to the Daily Wire. USAID gave a known con man $800 million contract to do Kamala Harris's work on root causes of migration. And this is wild, Garrett. This title does not do this scam justice. Okay. So the DOJ announced that our bad guy here, whose name is Walter Barnes, he's a founder of a government contractor called Vistant, and another guy named Roderick Watson. So we have Barnes and Watson. Barnes is the outside contractor. Watson was a USAID contracting official. So he's the government official who gets bribed. They pleaded guilty to this bribery scheme in which Barnes and two others conspired to pay Watson $1 million in exchange for him steering $544 million of contracts over to them. So it's a kickback scheme, pretty basic. What has not been reported is that the Biden administration continued to steer contracts to Barnes and Vistant even after it knew about the corruption. $800 million contract went to a joint venture between Barnes's company, which is called Vistant, and another company called Collaborate Up. It's a tiny consultancy run out of a small home in Falls Church, Virginia, where its CEO, Richard Crespin, who runs a company while he's working at a think tank. So he runs this as a side hustle and is able to land an $800 million contract. Okay. In announcing the contract, Collaborate Up said it would address irregular migration from Central America to the United States by addressing climate change. Its website also touts its work in advancing DEI. Oh, they actually call it DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, and combating misinformation. Let's push pause here just to reset the Captain Obvious Doctrine. We have one guy who's we know is engaging in kickbacks where he's saying to the government worker, I'll give you $1 million if you give my company $500 million in contracts. We have that in evidence. And instead of stopping all of sort of business dealings with this gentleman, we say we're going to give him another $800 million because he's partnering with another group, and their effort is to find out why are the illegals flooding across the border, and they're going to say it's because of the sun monster, and we want to push DEI. This goes all the way back to the Captain Obvious Doctrine. USAID is a complete boondoggle, and only the most corrupt people are engaged in it. And it should be entirely defunded. And yet we can't seem to get the likes of Susan Collins to get on board to defund it.
remember Doge, Steve? It seems like years ago. But Doge came in with a heavy hand and a heavy mandate, and they were fulfilling it right off the bat. And USAID was one of their primary targets from the jump. And there was all of this protesting, even by politicians outside of USAID buildings. And we can't let Elon Musk run the government, and we can't let Doge take over. And then we learn of all these revelations of how many billions of dollars is getting wasted or sent into corruption schemes like this one. Well, and then, Elon Musk leaves his position because he realized there's no stopping the behemoth that is government. And when government gets to that point, I'll say again, are you living in a tyranny, or are you living in this great republic that's a bastion for freedom?
So it goes beyond just simply graft and corruption. It gets worse, Garrett. I'm going to go back to this piece because this has not been exposed. We heard about the DOJ charging. I mean, you and I didn't because we're blocked from the DOJ press releases, but everybody else heard about it. Now, Vistant, again, our bad guy's name here is Barnes. His company is called Vistant. Their scheme relied on this joint venture with this DEI policy, which lets the government award contracts with no or limited competition. So a no bid contract when the recipient is a racial minority. It formed a joint venture with the larger company, which was bribing Watson, and would actually do the work so that Watson could use Barnes's status as a black man to steer the contracts to him. Okay, let me reset this. Barnes, our bad guy here, is a black guy. He partnered with another company because they were the DEI company. And they were going to do all the work to prove how the illegals were coming to America because of climate change. And the only reason they partnered with Barnes was because, one, he's willing to bribe government officials, and two, because he's black, and that ensured that the contract they were getting, the $800 million contract, was essentially a no-bid contract because the policy exists in USAID to give no-bid contracts because one of the recipients is a black guy. But wait, Garrett, it's worse. Collaborate Up, who Barnes partnered with, who was going to do all the work, says it co-developed USAID's procurement reform policies. So the company that they partnered with wrote the policies for the USAID to give them back the $800 million contract so that they could get it at a no bid rate because they had partnered with a corrupt guy because he was a black guy. Captain Obvious Doctrine. Everybody goes to jail.
But no one will.
No.
He's a friend. He gets the contract. He's black, so he's faced racial inequality his entire life, and so we've got to give it to him. And he was working for Queen Kamala, so just give him the 800 mil, even though he's a known con man. But you must be racist if you think that.
Well, I mean, those two companies were really super concerned about the sun monster and Gaia, and we have to worship at the altar, not just DEI, but of the climate change. The people are the problem. It's all that carbon there. The Captain Obvious Doctrine, though, plays into this a little bit, and there's been a little bit of a pushback on the green energy front, and it's not just limited to America. This one is a study out of the University of Gothenburg. I think it's Sweden, but I don't know. It's one of them countries. I'm from America. It doesn't matter. Higher energy prices reduce support for climate policy. When it comes down to it, really, it's just a matter of dollars and cents.
Captain Obvious strikes again.
The study examined the attitudes of 4,000 households near one of Sweden's electricity bidding zone borders towards carbon pricing. The results show that the exposure to doubled electricity prices increased opposition to the fuel taxes by 20%. So we're going to double your energy prices, and 1 out of 5 people were like, hey, wait a minute, I don't like this policy. Seems like the Swedish people need to take a lesson out of the Boston Tea Party, which threw the tea into the harbor because there was a couple cents extra. But they are more passive people than us. Back to the piece here. The study shows that higher electricity prices led many people to develop an exaggerated perception of how costly and unfair the taxes are. This is a very down the middle scientific process here. No sorts of biases. Quote, much of the opposition to carbon taxes is based on misconceptions.
Oh, sure.
Those energy prices, you're just imagining them going up. People tend to underestimate the environmental benefits and overestimate the cost. How dare you look at your bill and say that price is what you have to pay? You're overestimating what the number is clearly in front of your eyeballs.
People care about the now. They care about their life right now. They care about the costs of everything because it actually matters to them. They aren't a government that can go $40 trillion in debt and say, hey, give us more, you rube. We're going to tax you more. We're going to take more. And we're not going to let you have cheaper anything. Cheaper meat because you need to be eating crickets. Cheaper energy because you must go green because we have dictated that you have to because it's better for the environment. Well, one, has that really been proven? I'm not holding my breath on that. And two, of course people say, you know what? I actually don't care that much because the bill is higher. Duh.
I got to eat. I got to feed my family. And I'm sorry, the bugs are not sufficient here. Now, look, if you really wanted to push the climate change initiative, you're going to have to go after the most vulnerable people first. You don't just put it on everybody. Like dad comes home and says like, what do we get in the mail today? Oh, more electric bills. And he's really kind of pissed off and he doesn't want to see the policy because he feels the pain, the immediate pain of having to pay that bill.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't go after dad. Who do
He's
you go
trying to
after?
bring home the bacon, not the crickets.
You go after the most vulnerable people, which leads me to another study that I found, which is Captain Obvious, but worth going into nonetheless. Climate change anxiety and pro-environmental behaviors, disentangling gender disparities.
Oh,
They married the sun monster to women need a fish. Women need a man like a fish needs a bicycle. All right. And I read through this study. I read through the entire thing just because it was fun. Introduction says that climate change represents, this is a scientific study. Let me preface with this. There's not supposed to be any bias with study. Science is a process. It is a process of coming up with a hypothesis using controlled variables and independent variables and seeing if the hypothesis is correct or incorrect. The introduction to this scientific study says climate change represents the most significant environmental and social issue of our time. Climate change anxiety has been identified as a relevant consequence of climate change globally. So, no biases whatsoever. All right. The study findings revealed that women reported a higher level of climate change anxiety compared to men. Now, they
wow.
studied 3,300 people, 1,500 men, 1,700 women, ages ranging from 18 to 74. So the full gambit. Women reported higher levels of climate change anxiety compared to men, and this was driven by women's higher levels of climate change anxiety, cognitive impairment. Climate change, cognitive anxiety, cognitive impairment. The Captain Obvious doctrine is we tell women for the last 25, 35 years, you should not get married and have a husband. You don't need a man. You should not have babies. You should deny that urge. And instead, we're going to make Mother Earth your baby. And then you're going to have anxiety about whether or not we're eating bugs tonight or having steak. This is the most Captain Obvious doctrine of all time. They went after the most vulnerable people, took away the maternal instinct, or at least the vessel, the outlet for them to exert that inclination, that natural desire, and instead assigned it to something else. Not their own progeny, not their own babies. It's either their fur baby or Mother Earth. And this is the most predictable result you would get. The study highlights, as a takeaway here before we get your thoughts, the study highlights the importance of exploring the gender gap in environmental related attitudes and behaviors and incorporation of gender mainstreaming in environmental sustainability policies and programs. We need to make sure that we're bringing in lots of women into the workplace so that we can have more policies that push us into having higher electric bills and make the women feel like they're really exerting the maternal influence. The study calls for the enhancement of the representation of women in environmental planning and inclusion of gender equality objectives.
Of course, this is the most obvious Captain Obvious doctrine yet, because it's almost as like there's a natural order to these type of things. God created Adam. Adam was lonely. God created Eve from Adam. Women, since the beginning, have been by nature and by design a nurturer. They're a crucial piece of what makes men and women different is their nurturing nature. And when you tell them, don't nurture your own family, don't have your own babies, just get a couple more cats and find something else to focus all that energy and drive towards. And well, Mother Earth. Mother Earth. We are all part of Mother Earth. And we need to take care of Mother Earth. And men, they're so destructive and their focus is on the wrong things. And so it's up to us, the childless cat ladies who want to deny our gender and deny the natural difference to take care of Mother Earth. Of course, there's a gender gap here because we're different.
And you targeted them.
Yeah,
And by the
intentionally.
way, The study was funded by the Lakaya Foundation, which the slogan is, "It's only progress if we all progress."
Oh gosh. Zoom
They have
out.
a budget of $750 million.
Oh, can I just get a couple million out of there? They wouldn't even notice.
Alright, so we transitioned away from government weaponization, politicization, law enforcement, kind of dipped our toes into the climate paganism, and now we're getting into the gender stuff. I've got a couple stories here again on the Captain Obvious doctrine. One is just this video, and as far as Captain Obvious goes, just like nakedly pandering for support by weak politicians who are not afraid to demonstrate weakness because they think it bodes well for them. Let's just give this Senator Padilla a play because he was crying on the Senate floor about having been arrested when he went in to try to storm into a press conference by Christine Ohm and didn't have a speech prepared. He said, "I have questions," and then I got arrested. But this is exactly what he wanted. But again, Captain Obvious, he just wanted this to happen all along, and this was his moment.
You've seen the video.
Yeah, I did.
I
You were a
was
jerk.
pushed and pulled, struggled to maintain my balance.
Work on that.
I was forced to the ground. First on my knees, and then flat on my chest. And as I was handcuffed and marched down a hallway, repeatedly asking, "Why am I being detained?" Not once did they tell me why.
So you're describing, Senator Padilla, the process of being arrested for illegal behavior in which you don't have to be explained that. And if you are resisting, you get put on your knees and then your belly and then you're handcuffed and then you're escorted to a detention facility. That's what happens when you get arrested. But I have to emote because this is for my fundraising and my campaign.
Yes.
Captain Obvious.
Are they going to follow through with charges on this guy? That's really all I want to know, because they should. This is, I think it's clear that this was planned. So he could get this moment where he could muster up some tears as if he's been victimized by the Gestapo. Because under Donald Trump, the police and the FBI and whoever else, they're the Gestapo now. But before they weren't, even though it's the same people in those positions. So
If Senator Padilla is that soft, he might actually be the ghostwriter for the final piece that we have today, which I got from the Toronto Sun. So we're going to go up to America's Hat, and we missed out on Father's Day. Is this past Sunday? We didn't really talk about it much, but as a callback to that, let's close out today with the final piece in the American Radicals podcast on the Captain Obvious doctrine. And what is my takeaway? The most obvious thing in the world out of this one. It's entitled, "On Father's Day, it's crucial to recognize the importance of mothers."
of course it is.
There are single fathers and two dad fathers. No, there are not two dad fathers.
No.
But whatever the case now, at the beginning of the fatherhood path, there was a woman. It seems only fair to acknowledge that on Father's Day. I'm not the first person to observe that if men gave birth, every family would have only one child, and then only if no one told men why they call it labor. Even before we got to the delivery room for the birth of my first child, I was ready to surrender. Had one of the nurses said to me, "We can end this now. Your wife's pain will stop, but you'll go home without a baby," I'd have made the deal. Yours truly would not be a father today.
Oh,
Father's Day is set aside so that children can thank dad. That is completely unnecessary. I am confident my children appreciate my role in their upbringing, and they need no special day on the calendar to let me know that. Captain Obvious doctrine. This guy is married to the biggest Karen in the history of the world. She's got a girl boss haircut, and he needs to pull out the doll and tell us where she hurts him.
Yes, absolutely that. I want to know his wife. I feel sorry for you. Why did you marry such a weakling?
Why did you procreate with him? Who would breed with this man? Only a Karen.
I'm nearly speechless, Steve, at how ridiculous that is. One, every day I cherish and recognize the importance of my children and my wife, of course. I wouldn't have children without my wife. That's, again, the natural order of things. It takes both a man and a woman, a husband and a wife. And, Mother's Day, Father's Day, okay, they're fine. They're fine, quote unquote, holidays that you recognize each other, whatever. But this, I mean, come on, dude.
Look, Father's Day to me is an opportunity for my kids to learn the process of expressing gratitude. It's actually more of a mom holiday in my book because my mom gets excited, or my wife gets excited for Father's Day because she's like, "What are we gonna do? It's an event." I'm like, I kind of don't want to do that, right?
I don't know. I'll smoke some ribs. I don't know.
But this is just a patently obvious pander to his own wife, very
Mhm.
much in line with what Senator Padilla was doing as a politician.
Babe, look
Um,
what I wrote. Look, babe, I got it posted in the Toronto Sun.
All right, we
And if
covered a lot, man. We covered a lot today. I'm glad we got to it. And I have a fun palate cleanse that involves artificial intelligence, which we're always kind of like scared of, but I got a good one. But as always, sir, why don't you close us out here on your biblical worldview on the American Radicals podcast?
Indeed, Romans 13 is where we're headed again. Imperative for the American Radicals to understand this core doctrine of our role with government. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval, for he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger, who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. And we left off last time talking about the whole world being under the control of the evil one. So we're going to pick up right there to get a little more explanation of what that means, why it's important to understand, and what we do marching forward with that information and knowledge.
Who is this archenemy of God, this evil one? Listen to John 12:31, where Jesus speaks of the devil and says he is the ruler of this world. And then again in John 14 and verse 30, he calls the devil the ruler of this world. And then again in chapter 16, verse 11, for the third time, the ruler of this world. And in Ephesians 2:2, he is the prince of the power of the air, the spirit working in the sons of disobedience. So you have Satan, who is the world ruler, who operates in the system and, listen carefully, in the people. The whole world is in his kingdom. John 8:44, you're of your father, the devil. And Satan is in them in the sense that he can attach his devious, evil deception to the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, and that way exercise influence over them. He is the God of this world, 2 Corinthians 4:4, who blinds minds. And Paul says in Ephesians 6:12, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, humanity, but against principalities and powers, the rulers of the darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in the heavenlies. It's not just a human complex of evil. It is behind that the entire force of hell operates. The enemy is not just sinful people. It is the system of evil behind that visible evil, that invisible system basically under the control of the prince of demons, Satan himself, and all his demon cohorts. Evil operates in the heart of every human being. So there is a cosmos of evil that operates in the human heart. But there's another powerful cosmos of evil in the invisible spiritual world run by Satan. What is Satan's objective? Listen to Peter's words, 1 Peter 5:8. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. seeking someone to devour. He's a killer. John 8 tells us he's a liar, the father of lies, and he is a murderer. He tempts, he lies, he seduces, he slanders, and Scripture gives us all of these illustrations. He distracts, he divides, he destroys, he sifts, he silences, he strategizes, he steals, he oppresses, he possesses, he blinds, and he kills. And how does he gain the power to do this? How is he so adept at drawing people into his methods? The answer comes in Revelation 12:9, which says this: Satan deceives the whole world. Satan deceives the whole world. Paul told the Corinthians he is disguised as an angel of light, and therein lies the deception. So what we're dealing with in the world is not just a complex of human evil, as vast and complete and comprehensive as it is. We're dealing with another level altogether, not just that visible human world, but that invisible demonic world. And Satan's ultimate goal is to prevent people from coming to Christ. His ultimate goal is to take over everything, to rule in the place of God. He is the usurper. And he has a goal. He has an objective. He's heading human history toward his kingdom. He has a goal. He has an objective. Satan is systematically working to get to his kingdom.
We'll stop there for today, just to kind of lay the groundwork for where we're headed. But I hope those of you who, like me, are really passionate about this piece that we do on the AMRAD podcast, that you're really paying attention and seeing clearly and understanding the root of evil in this world, as he was describing there. We'll pick it up again next time with more of that information.
All right, and for today's palate cleanse, we're always cautioning about the artificial intelligence. What happens when a Skynet becomes self-aware and goes after the humans, right? That's where it inevitably goes. But along the path, you can have a couple of laughs. And a teacher here did a really good job of finding out what her students wanted to be when they grew up, and then doing some aging processes, and then showing it to them at the end of the year so they could look into their future as to what they look like when they grew up finally.
Dude, I love that. What a great idea. And to see the reactions and even their fellow classmates like, oh yeah, that's it. That's going to be that person.
It
That's
really
cool.
was. It was a good gift that she gave them on their way out for the end of the school year. So
Yeah,
if
that's
there's any
cool.
burgeoning teachers in there, if you want to embrace the AI, that's an idea for you for next school year. All right, that's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. Back with you Saturday, 10:30 Eastern time here on rumble.com/amradpod. Until then, guys, have a good day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.